Welcome, Kim, to the Conversations on Collective Wellbeing. Could you introduce yourself and tell us how your work is related to well-being?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for this interview and the chance to talk about the well-being of rural and Native young people in this country. So my name is Kim Phinney, and I'm co-founder of the Rural Youth Catalyst, along with my colleague, Kathy Moxon. And we work nationally, and we do a range of things, but the thing that we want to accomplish most is all the ways to support rural and Native young people to realize their hopes and dreams, whatever that means. In particular, our focus is with rural and Native opportunity youth, and opportunity youth is our positive framing of young people that are out of school and unemployed and in poverty, growing up in poverty. So instead of using all the negative ways that we frame young people, we frame, individuals and families and young people living in poverty and all those barriers. And then on top of that, all the negative ways we frame rural and Native communities and young people in those communities. Instead, we collectively, we didn't come up with that reframe. It is a global movement to say these are young people filled with tremendous opportunity, and our community and our cultures and our society needs every last young person. So our work is in a rural and Native context, domestically in the US. And in that work, we seek to support young people, whether they want to remain in their communities or return to rural communities, but also dispel the myth of the brain drain and that, oh, well, rural communities should just shrivel up and die. And instead, if we invest in the vitality and in the well-being of our young people, right? And what would happen if we walked well-being across all of those 9 domains for every single young person, and every single young person in our rural communities and Native nations? And what would that look like? Because, of course, their well-being is inextricably linked to the vitality of well-being of our communities, right? So we seek to support practitioners that are out there working at the local level or in other intermediaries, or even working from a predominantly urban organization, but wanting to support rural communities. So we partner with them. We provide supports, and whether that's professional development or helping to surface innovation or tackle barriers together. We seek to change the perception and the narrative around rural and Native youth, create leadership opportunities at all different levels for young people. And then we are really seeking to change what are the measures that we use. This is a long-term project, right, that we're just embarking on. But we've just launched a national rural and Native youth working group. So with youth practitioners from across the country. So this is, built from rural roots with rural intention, with everyone around the table is focused in some way in their work and in their lives on rural and Native young people. And how do we change the outcomes? And within that is the measures that are used to address those outcomes. So we're using a well-being framework, and we're using that deep systems thinking to say, how do we come at this? And this isn't just a intellectual exercise. Our short-term and long-term goal is a national working group that builds a larger coalition that is focused on action and changing policy.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's a lot of deep work you're doing there. You've started to touch on some of these, but I will ask you the formal question. Recently, you've offered some really thoughtful critiques around philanthropy. For example, talking about realistic versus unrealistic timelines when it comes to seeing change. And you've talked about how metrics, whether we're using the correct metrics or target outcomes, and using workforce training and economic models rather than well-being models. Can you say a little bit more about these and other areas where you see opportunities for improvement within the funding community that would provide the well-being of people doing the work, that would promote the well-being of people doing the work, as well as the rural youth they serve?
Right, sure. That's a great question. While we talk about in a robust way youth development, while we have all kinds of research now, right, and applied research around where young adults are at, where brain development is at, while we then layer on everything we know about trauma-informed approaches, healing-centered engagement approaches, from historic trauma to immediate trauma to both what young people are facing, you know, in the larger system around them versus, as well as personally in their homes. So while we know all of that, and we do all kinds of good trainings and conversations, we know a lot about learning differences. We know the connections between trauma and how that impacts young people's ability to learn, right? We don't do anything to actually pull that forward and look at that as success, right? So we have these 9 domains that are now being used globally that we're just on fire about, right? We have tremendous research by Circle, that is the leaders around youth civic engagement out of Tufts University, and they are deeply leaning in and doing deep research around rural and young people within this. We know that 60% of rural young people live in civic deserts, right? We know that the ability for civic engagement ties to a young person's sense of belonging, ties to their sense of purpose, ties to their sense of community. Nothing is more important for opportunity youth, right? And when we talk about well-being, we're talking about that sense of belonging, right? And how we create that. When we talk about the vitality of rural communities, we talk about how we need young people engaged, and they need leadership, right? And they need to feel connection to their communities. We know from the wonderful folks out there doing research that the more rural and Native young people feel a sense of connection to their communities through childhood and young adulthood, they are more likely to remain or to return based on that sense of connection and belonging. But we don't pull any of that forward, right? And instead, programs face increasing pressure to move opportunity youth through in a 6-month time period. So, you know, these are young people that are showing up with all kinds of trauma, that are test averse, right, as they should be, that don't have the you know, don't have the skill sets to do that kind of seat, you know, just the requirements for seat time, right? It doesn't mean that they can't gain that if we meet them from a holistic place, right? Imagine if we walked it from the 9 domains of well-being. Imagine if we were using all of those measures to determine success, right? Then what would that look like? And we gave both practitioners and young people the skills and the understanding, right? I mean, that's revolutionary, to be able to build those well-being skills, to be able to do, you know, to do the seat time, to do the academic, you know, to meet those academic success outcomes, to then set them up for long term. Imagine if we were responsible for reporting to the federal government all of these meeting the same level of civic engagement outcomes, right? Circle has created a framework for every community to use, right? Like, we know there are so many pieces around this. Imagine if we were measuring, you know, well-being skills within the individual skill building with young people, as well as at the program level, right? As much as micro-credentials and placement in a job and livable wage, right? What would that mean? And what would the long-term results? The other piece of it that this sets up that is just, it's a losing game, as we like to say, because it pits communities against each other.
Yeah.
Right. And when it comes to rural and native nations, it doesn't mean there's not all kinds of important conversations to be had around economic development and vitality and how we, walk across the triple bottom line. We're not, and how we do wealth creation. We're not arguing with that. We're just saying that when you take this kind of short-term, short gain, it's predicated on the idea that there are industry, right? That there is these high growth industries out there. And if you do some work with young people and you get them this training and you get them placed, everyone's going to have work. And it's a very urban frame, right? It's not one that is about long-term sustainability. Whereas if we walk it from a well-being framework, if we draw on and listen closely and have the bravery to watch what's happening in other countries, whose young people, particularly the same, issues that they're talking about and addressing, are so aligned with what rural and native communities. Of course, we have a different, there are going to be different elements to it or different ways that it needs to be adapted within the US. But if we took a well-being framework, then we are caring about all of our communities, right? And not just the few that can manage to, first of all, identify those industries, have the level of placement opportunities, and pull those grants down.
Wow. Thank you so much